Good afternoon. Missed you guys. Under President Trump's leadership, the United States economy is growing at record levels, putting the president in a strong position to fix long-standing trade concerns with China. On Thursday, the president will meet with the Chinese vice premier, who is here this week for continued talks. President Trump is committed to achieving greater market access for U.S. exports and better treatment for our farmers, ranchers, and businesses. Fair and reciprocal trade with China will boost long-term economic growth, not only in the United States, but globally. As the president said last week, the United States proudly stands with the people of Venezuela, who have courageously spoken out against the corrupt and illegitimate regime of Nicolas Maduro. Maduro must do what's right and allow for free, fair, and credible elections in accordance with democratic principles. To speak more about U.S. policy towards Venezuela and to take your questions, I'd like to welcome to the podium National Security Advisor, Ambassador John Bolton, Secretary of the Treasury, Steven Mnuchin, and Director of the National Economic Council, Larry Kudlow. And after that, I'll be up to take other questions of the day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Sarah. As you know, on January the 23rd, President Trump officially recognized the president of the Venezuelan National Assembly, Juan Guaidó, as the interim president of Venezuela. Venezuela's National Assembly invoked Article 233 of the country's constitution to declare Nicolas Maduro illegitimate. This action was a statement that the people of Venezuela have had enough of oppression, corruption, and economic hardship. Since then, 21 other governments in the region and across the world have joined the United States in recognizing Guaidó as Venezuela's interim president. Today, and I'll turn the podium over to Steven Mnuchin for this purpose, we're going to announce sanctions against Petroleos de Venezuela, Sociedad Anima, or PDVSA, as it's known by its Spanish acronym, the state-owned oil monopoly. We have continued to expose the corruption of Maduro and his cronies, and today's action ensures they can no longer loot the assets of the Venezuelan people. We expect, and Secretary Mnuchin will go into this in more detail, that today's measure totals $7 billion in assets blocked today, plus over $11 billion in lost export proceeds over the next year. We also today call on the Venezuelan military and security forces to accept the peaceful, democratic, and constitutional transfer of power. And to a certain extent, this has already begun. We have seen Venezuelan official and military personnel heeding this call. The Venezuelan defense attaché here in Washington recognized President Guaidó a few days ago, and just within the past hours, the first consul of Venezuela's consulate in Miami, Scarlett Salazar, has also declared for interim President Guaidó. I call on all responsible nations to recognize interim President Guaidó immediately. Maduro has made clear he will not recognize Guaidó or call for new elections. Now is the time to stand for democracy and prosperity in Venezuela. I reiterate that the United States will hold Venezuelan security forces responsible for the safety of all U.S. diplomatic personnel, the National Assembly, and President Guaidó. Any violence against these groups would signify a grave assault on the rule of law and will be met with a significant response. Now let me give the floor to Steven Mnuchin, who will describe the sanctions that we're imposing.
Thank you. Today, Treasury took action against Venezuela's state-owned oil company, PDVSA, to help prevent the further diversion of Venezuela's assets by former President Maduro. The United States is holding accountable those responsible for Venezuela's tragic decline. We will continue to use all of our diplomatic and economic tools to support interim President Guaidó, the National Assembly, and the Venezuelan people's efforts to restore their democracy. PDVSA has long been a vehicle for embezzlement, for corruption, for Venezuelan officials and businessmen. Today's designation of PDVSA will help prevent further diversion of Venezuela's assets by Maduro and will preserve these assets for the people of Venezuela where they belong. The path to sanctions relief for PDVSA is through the expeditious transfer of control to the interim president or a subsequent democratically elected government who is committed to taking concrete and meaningful actions to combat corruption. Today's actions against PDVSA follows my determination that persons operating in the Venezuelan oil sector may now be subject to sanctions. Today, OFAC also issued a number of general licenses that authorize certain transactions and activities with PDVSA for limited periods of time to minimize any immediate disruptions and support of ongoing humanitarian efforts. Citgo assets in the United States will be able to continue to operate, provided that any funds that would otherwise go to PDVSA instead will go into a blocked account in the United States. Refineries in the United States have already been taking steps to reduce their reliance on imports from Venezuela. Those imports have fallen substantially in recent months. We have also issued general licenses to ensure that certain European and Caribbean countries can make an orderly transition. We continue to call on all of our allies and partners to join the United States in recognizing interim President Guaidó and blocking Maduro from being able to access PDVSA funds. Thank you with that, and I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Ambassador Bolton, if I could, you mentioned the word significant response. How do you define significant response?
Well, we're not going to define it because we want the Venezuelan security forces to know how strongly we think that President Guaidó, the National Assembly, the opposition, and most importantly, American personnel are not harmed. This is an unequivocal statement on our part.
Is there any circumstance under which American forces would get involved?
Look, the President has made it very clear on this matter that all options are on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You explained that there are some actions being taken here to mitigate some of the impact on the U.S. oil market. Can you walk us through those and explain how U.S. oil imports from Venezuela will be affected here, what's going to happen with the money, and where you think that is going to have some impact on the oil market globally?
Sure. Well, let me just comment that we will be releasing FAQs with the general licenses to explain a lot of these issues, but effective immediately, any purchases of Venezuelan oil by U.S. entities, money will have to go into blocked accounts. Now, I've been in touch with many of the refineries. There is a significant amount of oil that's at sea that's already been paid for. That oil will continue to come to the United States. If the people in Venezuela want to continue to sell us oil, as long as that money goes into blocked accounts, we'll continue to take it. Otherwise, we will not be buying it. And again, we have issued general licenses, so the refineries in the United States can continue to operate. So I expect in the short term very modest impacts on the U.S. refineries. We've been working with them closely on these issues.
Did you walk the U.S. oil industry through what's going to happen here in advance, or are they hearing about this for the first time right now?
They're hearing about this now, but I generally say we made a press release recently. I think we've indicated certain things, so we had not disclosed to anybody these sanctions in advance, but I think a lot of people have been preparing for this over the last month.
With the blocked accounts, what would be the mechanism and what would be the timeline if there is this peaceful transfer of government? How would the money go from the blocked accounts back, and would be Juan Guaidó would be the operating person to take it back and receive it back if he's put into power? What's the mechanism?
So let me just comment that in general, okay, as we've said in the past, the purpose of sanctions is to change behavior. So when there is a recognition that PDVSA is the property of the rightful rulers, the rightful leaders, president, then indeed that money will be available to Guaidó. We will be working with them on the money in the blocked account and whether that can be used for them.
Could you explain to the country what the strategic interests of the United States are in Venezuela now and its immediate future? What's at stake for us, and why this significant response held in abeyance if this transfer of government isn't achieved?
Well, we think stability and democracy in Venezuela are in the direct national interest of the United States right now under the Chavez-Maduro government. Civil society in Venezuela is disintegrating. The economy is in a state of collapse. Something in the range of 3 to 4 million refugees have already fled the country for neighboring countries in the United States. And the authoritarian regime of Chavez and Maduro has allowed penetration by adversaries of the United States, not least of which is Cuba. Some call the country now Cubazuela, reflecting the grip that Cuba's military and security forces have on the Maduro regime. We think that's a strategic, significant threat to the United States, and there are others as well, including Iran's interest in Venezuelans' uranium deposits.
Yeah, and let me just comment. This is a country that is very rich in oil resources. There's no reason why these resources shouldn't be used for the economic benefit of the people there. There's no reason for the poverty and the starvation and the humanitarian crisis.
Can I ask both of you, the United States has talked a lot about a potential embargo on sales of oil and also stopping selling of oil products to Venezuela. Why haven't those been considered yet?
So there will be, as part of this, limitations on selling oil products as part of the sanctions. As regards to an embargo, we're not going to make any comment on that today. We don't comment on future actions.
Has the administration talked to Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Maduro seemed to anticipate the actions that you've announced today in the briefing room. He warned that Citgo is the property of the Venezuelan state, and he further said that we are the only ones who can decide its fate. What is your response to Mr. Maduro?
Again, it's the property of the Venezuelan people and the proper and rightful leaders of the country. So we agree with that. He's not the proper leader of the country at this time. And I've said these are valuable assets that we are protecting for the benefit of the Venezuelan people.
If I could hone in on the question about the impact on the markets. Came and asked you about refineries. You said it'll have a modest impact. What do American drivers need to know about the possible impact of the price at the pump, if any at all?
Well, first let me say, there's been a big reduction in the overall price of oil. And particularly since we instituted the Iran sanctions, I think, we've been very careful in making sure that these costs don't impact the American consumer. Gas prices are almost as low as they've been in a very long period of time. These refineries impact a specific part of the country, and I think, as you've said, we're very comfortable that they have enough supply that we don't expect any big impact in the short term.
Do you feel that fact emboldens your position, or do you feel the United States is able to take these measures as a result of the low gas prices or low oil prices on the whole, and does that increase the United States' leverage in this debate?
I would just say we are very determined, whether it's in the case of Iran or it's the case in here, to use sanctions, to use them in the right way. And we're very comfortable that we've coordinated with the Department of Energy and other people on this mechanism.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. There have been reports that there are an estimated 25,000 Cuban troops in Venezuela, troops or secret police, which is a clear violation of the OAS Charter, Chapter 4, Article 21, about troops of another country in a sovereign nation. Will the United States raise a complaint, if nothing else, with the Havana regime about troops in Venezuela?
As you know, Secretary of State Pompeo addressed the OAS General Assembly a few days ago. We expect other meetings of the OAS on this and related subjects in the coming days because, as both Secretary Mnuchin and I have said, we know what the legitimate government of Venezuela is. And it's our mission now to make a full reality in Venezuela what the people of Venezuela themselves want.
Do you have confirmation of that number?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Since we have you in the room here, if you don't mind me turning your attention to the talks that'll take place at the end of this week. The statement was put out just before you came out here, the talks with China. In your opinion, where does all of that stand right now? Are you comfortable with progress that's been made in the last couple of weeks? Larry Kudlow has said that the talks over the next couple of days will be determinative. Is that your assessment as well?
I think we've had very productive conversations going back between the meeting between the two presidents, which was a very important time. I think we sent a team over to Beijing There were very significant discussions for that period of time. We've had conversations since then. Ambassador Lighthizer and I are looking forward to the 2 day of talks. President Trump is going to meet with Vice Premier Liu He at the end of those. Now, let me just remind people, we do have another 30 days after this, so my expectation is that we'll make significant progress at these meetings, but I would just emphasize these are complicated issues. We have a timeline of how we've mapped out the 90 days.
How much progress has been made in the last month, if you can sort of characterize it?
Again, I would just comment that I think there's been significant movement, and we're working through what are still very complicated issues.
Mr. Secretary, I want to go back to gas prices. Can you qualify and quantify? I understand that you're saying the gas prices are low now, but in the midst of this, with all of this that's happening in Venezuela, how long do you believe that the gas prices will move up to a modest impact on the oil industry? And can you quantify by how much? By cents, by tens of cents, or even by dollars? I mean, what is the modest impact that you're expecting?
Sure. Well, let me comment that in general, I've said this before, markets are not always efficient. They move in different directions, so I want to be careful in not speculating on markets. I mean, I think kind of oil went up a lot right before the Iran sanctions. We were surprised that it went up so much. I think, President Trump had been on the phone with many world leaders and making sure there was ample supply. Prices came down. The U.S. is a big exporter of oil, so there's a balance here. But I think where oil prices are now reflect the supply and demand in the market. And as I've said, we're dealing with Venezuelan oil that is a rather modest part of our overall supply. Again, we're a net exporter of energy. We are particularly concerned that there were a handful of refineries that had a dependence on Venezuelan oil. I think they read the tea leaves. They reduced that dependence significantly along the way. Most of them have in the neighborhood of 10% or less of their dependence on Venezuelan oil. So I don't expect that people will see an impact on the gas pumps.
Are you talking about sweet or sour crude from Venezuela? Sweet or sour crude?
Again, I'm not going to get into all the specifics of the different oil markets, but let me just say that most of these refineries, this is about 10% or less. There's plenty of supply at sea that's already been paid for, so there's inventories. There's been excess oil. I'm sure many of our friends in the Middle East will be happy to make up the supply as we push down Venezuela's supply. But let me again just emphasize, the right outcome is a transition for PDVSA. The right outcome for the Venezuelan people is to have these companies rebuilt and to make sure that they get out of poverty. It's a complete tragedy to have the humanitarian crisis in a country that has very rich resources.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Yes. No.
Thank you. Ambassador Bolton, can I ask you a question, please?
Wait, we were recognizing her, and then you can go
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. On China, if you would just address what you believe is we've heard this word enforcement quite a bit. Is that being a priority for the administration during these talks?
Enforcement will definitely be one of the topics that Ambassador Lighthizer and I have on the agenda. And I think this is pretty obvious, but we want to make sure that we expect when we get a deal that deal will be enforced. And I would say in the conversations we had previously with them, there's been an acknowledgement with China that they understand that. Now, the details of how we do that are very complicated. That needs to be negotiated. But IP protection, no more forced joint ventures, and the enforcement are three of the most important issues on the agenda.
Ambassador Bolton, has the President spoken directly with President Guaidó? And if so,
Can you start that over again, please?
Sure. Has the President spoken directly with President Guaidó? If so, can you summarize that conversation? And how safe does the President believe our diplomats are currently?
The Vice President has had several conversations with interim President Guaidó, including most recently the night before we granted recognition. He'll be meeting with interim President Guaidó's ambassador here in the near future. In terms of American official personnel, it has been an absolute top priority for President Trump, the Vice President, Secretary Pompeo, and myself. We have drawn down significantly personnel at the embassy. All dependent personnel are gone. We believe we are now prepared as prepared as we can be. We're reevaluating the safety conditions at all time, and it's why we have said we've presented credentials to interim President Guaidó. We recognize him as the legitimate president. He has asked for us to stay. We have made very clear to what's left of the Maduro regime that we hold them responsible, and we take their commitment to do that very seriously.
In the back. Yes.
Ambassador Bolton, if I may ask you, what is your assessment of the relationship between Nicolas Maduro and his military? Do you believe support is fracturing? And do you believe that the Russians are playing any kind of role in trying to support the military?
Well, our assessment based on numerous contacts on the ground is that the rank and file of the Venezuelan military is acutely aware of the desperate economic conditions in the country. And we think they look for ways to support the National Assembly government. We think the junior officer ranks and the mid-level officer ranks are the same. And we are also aware of significant contacts between general officers of the Venezuelan military and supporters of the National Assembly. So you may have seen a statement last week by the defense minister, Vladimir Padrino, flanked by a number of generals in uniform. What they didn't know was how many of them were already talking to the National Assembly.
Okay. We'll take one more here.
Twofold. Do we have a timeline where we're going to reassess as to whether or not these sanctions are working and what the next step would be? Is there a timeline in place for that? And secondly, can you speak to the administration's critics who say that since the government shut down, the administration is in disarray?
Well, let me first say, on sanctions, we always evaluate sanctions continuously, both existing sanctions as well as future sanctions. So we will carefully be looking at the effectiveness of these and whether we need additional sanctions. Now, I would just tell you, speaking for Treasury, I want to thank all the large number of government workers who came in. I will tell you, as it relates to specifically the sanctions area, people have been working around the clock, and we couldn't have gotten this done without the enormous support of all the people who came in. So quite the contrary, we weren't in disarray. Again, I want to thank all the important people who helped out on this.
Mr. Secretary?